It's because simply they were physically more developed in proportion to Turks due to their European genes, genetics. And what has got to do with the humanists? It's got to do everything with the humanists. Not only were European cities burned to the ground very often, but entire states as well. Entire European states were basically paying for what was ransom fees, or just to be left alone. Temporary. Or in return for paid monies to Turkish sultans and what was complete abolition of education or school institutions. Development, in other words, prosperity. While a requirement per conversion to a Muslim Quran was well desired as well. Appreciated, sure. In other words, for complete submission and compliance or acceptance of dark ages, for self-failure embracement, for denial of European heritage and ancestry, for acceptance of traitorship and foist against own European people and cultures by those who are placed on power in order to serve collection of taxes, ransom fees, in other words. For Turkish sultans, and on their behalf, were those in return granted their allowance to luxuries. Yes, to the luxuries, unthinkable for the rest of what was, as you know, completely enslaved, demoralized, destituted, impoverished, ruined population, European population. The population that was allowed basically to breathe air only. The population that was turned into what was a vegetation state, agony, just so they could be destroyed in the end anyways and anyhow, regardless of compliance with Ottoman Empire or Turkish state. Disease of diseases, regardless of compliance not only with Ottoman or Ottoman Empire or Turkish state, but in compliance with traitors, with people who have betrayed, with the people who have created for luxus, for prestige. Oh, but it sounds like something that is taking place today in our surroundings, does it? Doesn't it sound perhaps what was taken centuries back in European history as something that is taking place today? And this is why I mentioned Americans dislike our heritage, our history, among others, because it's got a lot to do with everything that's basically taking place today. The quality of education in Europe, among other things, today is stagnating enormously. And I wouldn't even talk about United States of America, where education is a bottom line garbage. And those on power often travel to exotic places. In case you have forgotten about French minister and other ministers who have that habit to travel to special places. Special places because, according to them, our environments and we just do not fulfill their expectations. You see, folks, they have higher expectations. And therefore they are in need of a change. They are in need of change. Change is good. I'm sure you have heard of that. Something different, something extraordinary. What is, in other words, to fulfill their pedophile pleasures in male children, from ministers, presidents, and folks, all the way to elite, or I should say elites, that are entitled to throw money away on international luxus, Bali, Bali, Asia, Indonesia, Micronesia, who knows what. And then most important, you know, folks, the most important, all this when our Catholic churches are basically guilty of what states, governments have deliberately omitted and allowed to go on. The horrible pedophilias behind the doors of church walls, which was taken for decades. Oh, why? Why have governments deliberately omitted such atrocities taking place behind the church walls? Solely with a criminal intention to deepen crisis. Meaning, the broadening of victims, the size of the victims, the more people got affected, the greater the effect, the flux was created upon that. The flux, which would be later on used to point into the church in order to destroy the church. Today, the governments, however, are the one to point the finger in everything. That is European, including our religions. So you see, folks, the history and the presence, how much it's got to do with one another. Hatred against own race, hatred against your heritage. It's real. It's more real than what you can imagine. Isn't it, let me ask you, isn't it equal participation of crime already to know about such atrocities taking place and deliberately choose to keep your mouth shut whenever you are already in government position? Isn't it equal participation in crime when knowing such atrocities are taking place yet deliberately fail to act? Isn't it? No, it's not. It's actually 10 times worse, because I have mentioned the word government. It is actually 10 times worse. It is the worst of the worst. And when we take the idea, the intention behind this, it just cannot be worse than what it is. It is complete betrayal of own people, of own population. In other words, maliciously keeping mouths shut so crisis can deepen, just so you could come out later and point the finger at abuser. It's worse. It's not guilty as perpetrators. It is worse. I wouldn't say disgrace and shame. It is beyond disgrace and shame, is what I would refer to that as. And in United States of America today, our people who are of European heritage are already and almost completely wasted, wiped out. Real statistics are by far more outrageous than those represented publicly or in worse scenarios. But the United States of America, unfortunately, was not a final goal for so-called humanists, you see. Instead, they have spread their diseases like in Middle Ages, Turkish Empire did. Now Americans have spread their diseases as well to other continents. And all thanks to our European friends, fellows, which have chosen basically, as now you, I'm sure, understand, simply betray their own nations for sake of self-profitability, egoism, regardless of consequences which have taken place afterwards. Everything with deliberate intention to destroy Europe and our European people, everything in the name of so-called humanism. That's why I was telling you about how it is important, how much importance it is when it comes to European heritage, European history.